Welcome everyone to NorthWest Digital News. I'm Kevin Hunter with Kyle Torgerson, and our special contributor out of California, Jody Summers, is joining us today on this health broadcast here on NorthWest Digital News. We're going to talk about osteoporosis. First of all, welcome Jody, and thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let's share with our viewing audience some of the medical field's explanation on what osteoporosis actually is. So before we get too far along here, bring up that video if you would, Kyle, and roll that video, and then we'll get into our conversation.
You know, osteoporosis is defined as a skeletal disorder of the bones, in which there's a reduction in the amount of strength in the bones. The bones are less strong than they should be because of, in most cases, a loss of bone, which occurs as we get older. And accompanying that loss of bone is a damage to the bone structure. The bones become weakened by this, and as a consequence, are much more likely to break. So with osteoporosis, what we're trying to do is prevent broken bones.
Well, Jody, that was the short, sweet explanation from the National Osteoporosis Foundation, courtesy of Dr. Ethel Sears. Your thoughts?
In a nutshell, it's correct. One of the things that I think we hear a lot is that osteoporosis is a loss of bone density, which she talked about, you know, weak bones, that kind of thing. I would like to add another word in there, which is much more descriptive and gives everybody a better understanding of what it really is and why it happens. So osteoporosis is a loss of mineral bone density, because the bones are made up of protein and minerals. And when we lose some minerals out of our bones, a little bit of mineral loss is osteopenia. A lot of mineral loss is osteoporosis. And oftentimes you'll go to sources like that and minerals are never mentioned when that's really what causes osteoporosis.
So, hey, I have a quick question, and maybe you weren't planning on digging into this aspect of this, but for people who are eating a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, what is it? Either enzymes or acids, what separates minerals from the food that you're eating in a fashion that your body can actually use it?
Okay, we could have a whole nother conversation around that. But it is both, and it is the digestion comes first, and we've done discussions on digestion. Right. So strong, healthy digestion helps break apart food in the very acidic stomach, and then that food breaks apart. So let's say you eat vegetable, whatever it is that you're eating. Okay, so you're eating a spinach salad with a little chicken on it. The stomach acid breaks that down into different parts, and then it is absorbed in the small intestine through all the different enzymatic properties that go through. So it's all of the things that you talked about. But if the digestion, at the very end, I'm going to talk about 4 ways to avoid and then recover from osteoporosis. And digestion and absorption is the #1 on the list.
Okay, perfect. The reason I had the question is that a lot of people may assume, like up front, and just say that, you know, we've been eating a lot of garden fresh vegetables or fruits, etc., and yet we have a problem with osteoporosis. Or bone density, you know, related bone density issues. I was guessing that was part of the problem. So let's talk about healthy bones. We have a graphic in the background here, one that's here just above you, which is the healthy bone view, and then the other one there, which is a loss of bone density. Explain what we're kind of seeing here with this graphic.
Absolutely. So healthy bone starts with the bone matrix, which is kind of the hard shell, and then minerals, which is like the protein buildup. So remember I said bones are protein and minerals? Right. You've got this bone matrix, and the mineral, it's the best storage place in your body for minerals, for calcium, magnesium, all those things are stored there. They also strengthen the bones and make us be able to do things with strong, healthy bones. But because it's porous, like you see, when a healthy bone, like the one on, of course now, I don't know, the one toward you, Kevin, yes, the one that looks healthy, that is the buildup of healthy bone. So the
this one
terms
right
that
here.
you might often hear of
Mm-hmm.
is osteoblast and osteoclast. And they have to work in conjunction. So osteoblast, think of the word B for build up,
Mm-hmm.
is when your body brings in all of those good nutrients and builds healthy bone. Okay? Just as important is osteoclast. And what that is when the body breaks down the old things, the used up type of nutrients, and gets rid of it. So oftentimes I will give somebody the example, because we can see this, and especially us girls who, scrub our face with scrubs and different, masks and things. When we have healthy skin, we're building up healthy skin with different nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we want to exfoliate, we take off all the old, and that reveals that healthy skin. Our bones are no different. Builds up with nutrients, breaks down the old, and gets rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the part about, as we get into this discussion, that we're oftentimes overlooking, and they're both super important, the building up and the breaking down. So when you have the right amount of nutrients, you're going to get healthy bone. And there's different reasons why you might not have that correct intake. And there's also reasons that you may not have the right output.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I guess when people recognize that bones are a living mechanism within the body, just like cells are, and when you think about the human cells, people recognize that cells are breaking down and rebuilding all the time, and what you give it as far as building materials has everything to do with how healthy that new cell is. Well, it makes sense that the same thing applies to the bones too.
So
okay, go ahead.
I was just going to talk about bisphosphonates and kind of some of the ways that, like if you go to the doctor, but did you have a question before I do
perfect.
that?
That's exactly what I wanted to mention is about biphosphonate. And if you can put that word into the stream, so anybody who's out there who wants to research this can. You mentioned before that one of the types of biphosphonate, which is Boniva, has been made famous by Sally Field. And there's dangers to these, because I just in the brief reading and looking that I've done at this, is that it talks about how biphosphonate can slow or even reverse bone thinning. What's the danger of these pharmaceutical drugs, and what are they actually doing if they're creating bone density?
So I'm going to give you a little story of Susie Q, who goes into, she's 50, she goes for her normal, yearly checkup. She goes to the doctor, he runs a bone scan, a density test, and says, oh my gosh, you're well on the way to osteoporosis. Your bones are not healthy. And she, let me give you information to take home about, we're going to put you on a bone density drug, this bisphosphonate type of a drug, and there's all sorts of different brands. That's the type of drug it is. There's lots of different brand names. Mm-hmm. And what that does, so she goes for the scan. She has porous bones, not good, dense bones. There is a problem, no doubt. And then the doctor puts her on a bisphosphonate. So now we're taking this drug. They're usually, oftentimes they're injections. There's different types. It doesn't really matter what kind. But what that does, and sometimes the bisphosphonate blocks the release of the old bone tissue. Okay, so your body builds it up, and it's supposed to let it go. But instead of looking at Susie Q and saying, oh my, I wonder why you're not building up like you should, I'm going to give a drug that stops the breakdown of the old used up bone material. So 3 to 6 months later, a year later, she goes back in for another scan, and the scan shows that the bone is denser. Mm-hmm. And it is denser. And he goes, look at how great that worked. That's fabulous. And we'll see you later. What you're not looking at is the health of the bone. So yes, now you've got a dense bone, but it has dead bone materials. And so you're not getting healthy bone, like building up minerals and protein. You're getting a buildup of old dead bone. That is dense on the scan, But the question is it any healthier than it was before? And if you look at the lawsuits of those types of bisphosphonate drugs, you'll see the risk is twofold. One, oftentimes people have extremely bad side effects in their jaws, and they get a thing called jaw necrosis, where you can look it up. It's horrible with pain and all sorts of things. And you break bones and your teeth have issues because of the not breaking down the old bone tissue. And the other thing is, once people have been on this type of a drug, if you do have a fall, so now you're 65 and you missed the last step and you fell, instead of that bone just breaking because it was weak previous, okay, it was weak, so it broke. Now it is full of dead tissue, maybe not all dead tissue, but it has a lot of old bone, dry brittle bone in it. And instead of breaking, it actually shatters. And that's where those lawsuits are coming from shattered bones and hips and wrists and things. And those cannot be fixed like a broken bone. So that's where the risk comes in.
You create like this image, or what I'm seeing here is a bone that becomes more like glass.
I have often said this, and this is a perfect time to say it. There is no pharmaceutical drug that makes up for nutritional deficiency. There just isn't. And in this case, instead of a better plan might be, especially because it's, there's no such thing as really acute osteoporosis, like you're going to die tomorrow. I mean, it's a dangerous thing to have. And it puts people at risk for all sorts of things, because if you break your hip, it's going to be hard to get around. You need help. People get isolated. They get depressed. It's a serious issue, but it's not like you're going to die tomorrow because you have a weak hip bone. So there is ways to kind of combat that and to prevent osteoporosis, as well as rebuild healthy bone.
Okay, so one of the you have some things that people can do to avoid this mineral bone density loss. I want to say this before you share that, because for people who are wanting to be proactive and recognize that there's things they can do to prevent this from happening entirely, I want our viewing audience to know that if you get yourself in a situation where you have suffered mineral bone density loss, and that happens to you, and you start having health complications as a result of it, aching back, aching joints, etc., all those sorts of things, I can tell you from my own personal experience that it's actually reversible. Okay, so what Jody's going to share with you, I want you to pay special attention to, because maybe you're now where I was 15 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, and experiencing the effects of rheumatoid arthritis and potentially, the same types of effects of osteoporosis. I don't pretend to know how these two diseases might be different from each other and how they impact the human body. What I do know is that life became very miserable for a while, and a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. And it was almost an emotional doctor visit that I had a month and a half ago in Minneapolis. And Dr. Mark Wheaton, who's actually done worked with me for a number of years now with my own back and bone related problems. And he was so excited to see me. And when we went through his normal checkups and everything else, he was just amazed. He was like, Kevin, he goes, your mobility is so much better than it was before. And I remember it was maybe 5 years or somewhere in that neighborhood that I had difficulty putting the palms of my hands on my knees, let alone touching the floor. And I could do that easily on this visit I just had at his office a short time ago. So I totally believe it's one thing to hear people say that these opportunities are there. It's a totally different thing to experience it for yourself. And I'll tell you what, I'm a total believer. Go ahead and share how to prevent. And by the way, for a viewing audience, just so you're paying attention, this is also a way to restore too. Go ahead, Jody.
So I have 4 things, and there's a couple things under each one. So, I can actually type this up and send you the notes as well, but the main absolute base of every good health, chronic illness, all of those things are built on a nutrient dense, properly prepared whole food diet. Mm-hmm. There's just no way around it. And you can do all of the other things, but if you're eating junk food, the other things, that's the foundation. The foundation is nutrient dense, whole food, properly prepared, real food diet. And that includes fat soluble vitamins and fat soluble foods. So one of the reasons I think that, well, there's a multiple number of reasons, but one of the reasons as we've looked that osteoporosis is increasing, yes, it is something that you get the older you get, and that's part of it, but is that we have really shied away from eating real whole food. And so back when my mother and father lived on a farm, they would raise an animal, kill the animal, and eat all the parts of the animal, including all of the fat soluble parts. So the liver and the organ meats and the bone marrow, and they cook all the bones and eat them. And all of those things also add to the bone health. Collagen, all of those things are part of our bone health.
So when you mentioned that, my wife Stephanie, her parents and their families, they both of her parents came from large families, and I thought they were doing all of those things you just described because of a food shortage situation. And then I would learn years later that no, actually, there's a reason why to do all of that. So, yeah.
And vegetables, whole vegetables, with all of those things in calcium, magnesium. So that's what it starts with, is a nutrient dense diet. Number 2, and remember that bone is made out of protein. So high protein, or moderate, and I'm not talking super high, but make sure you're getting good, healthy protein. Mm-hmm. And those minerals. So remember, minerals come from the soil. Mm-hmm. They don't come from anything else. So plants that are grown in mineral rich soils have more minerals. Mm-hmm. Animals that eat plants that come from mineral rich soils have more minerals. So we can get minerals from animals, but it's because the plants were grown in the mineral rich soil. Or you can supplement with minerals, and that's I do every day without fail. It's the one thing I always do. So nutrient dense diet. Number 2, digestion and absorption. And again, we've talked about this several times, that our digestion is so important. Good, strong stomach acid, breaking down the food so you can then get the absorption of those minerals out of that food. Mm-hmm. Things that can actually prevent that is PPI drugs, which is acid reducing drugs. And the other thing that I was just having a conversation yesterday with somebody is people who have their gallbladder removed, tend not to have the best absorption of fat soluble vitamins because the gallbladder is involved with emulsification and absorption of fat soluble nutrients. Mm-hmm. And that's needed. And so if you don't have a gallbladder and you're on PPI drugs, you're at risk for osteoporosis. Again, we can make a whole conversation around that, but those are 2 things that I would watch for. The third thing is movement and strength. And so you'll often see encouraging a strength training, weightlifting, walking, yoga, all of those things, putting strength on the bone. Just like our muscles, you need to work them to keep them strong. Bones are exactly the same, and it helps keep those minerals attached to the bone. Mm-hmm. That's where those things are. And the fourth thing is, if there is some struggle with bone density, bone health. And again, it's not just density, because you can have unhealthy dense bones, which doesn't really help anything, but you need healthy dense bones, is supplementation. Calcium, magnesium, vitamin D3, always, always, always from a natural source, because the synthetic D2 can actually cause more problems. K2 helps the nutrients stick to the bone. Strontium, which is a mineral. And the last thing is, a lot of research has recently been done on probiotics, which is the gut health, because I don't know really, I have to actually do some study on that, but there's some really close ties between a healthy gut bacteria and healthy bones. So that's my top 4: diet, absorption, digestion, movement, and supplementation.
We'll add these notes in for the benefit of our viewing audience, but I took notes here as you was going through these. So the 4 things that Jody shared here: number 1, nutrient-dense whole food, properly prepared, a real food diet. Number 2 is digestion and absorption. Number 3, movement and strength. And number 4, supplementation, calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, K2, probiotics. Did I miss anything in the supplementation?
Well, one of the things is strontium, which is just a trace mineral, but it also adds, and you find that in things, well, nutrient-rich soils, but also things like seaweed, vegetables from the ocean, that kind of stuff. So, you know, but again, if you're eating from soils that have a lot of nutrients in them, that should be there as well. But that is a very necessary trace mineral for good bone health.
You know, something that I thought of here as you were describing that I wanted to mention is that there are so many sources. Like you think about different things that we use, there are so many similar components that actually contain a lot of great minerals on top of doing what you're trying to do. So let's say, as an example, somebody's using table sugar, a little bit of table sugar in their coffee, and they're like saying, well, I could never give that up. My response to that would be to say is that, well, if you can't give up the sweetener, still encourage people to use less of it, but if you can't give up the sweetener, use something like grade B maple syrup, because it's chock full of minerals.
That's an option as well. Another thing that is really good in coffee that doesn't really add a lot of flavor, but is just collagen powder. And again, you don't even know it's in there.
Yeah. So, that's another great. Another one, I think about people and the amount of table salt they use. What about using sea salt?
Yep.
You know,
yep.
So I mean, if you keep researching and people keep digging into this, I think of how many, because what we kind of did, and this has been a process that has recycled probably a number of times in the household, because, you know, you keep learning more things about things. But what we did was kind of put everything on the table that we consumed or that we ate and went, instead of this, or if we're going to continue to use this, are there better options for it? And yeah, that's
every cool. Little step is a step closer to health, because there is no one magic pill. There is no one thing that brings good health. There's no one thing. If you just did one of these things on this list, you're probably still going to have bone issues. You know, if you didn't do all the others, it's all of it together. We are complex beings, and there's just no magic pill to be healthy.
So, hey, I have a quick question for you. One of the followers on Twitch TV mentioned that they would like more information on the situation with gallbladder, because their gallbladder was removed. Do you have any suggestions for anybody who's in that situation, how they can overcome that?
So the gallbladder is just a storage unit for bile. Mm-hmm. Bile breaks down fat, emulsifies the fat, so your body gets more of that absorption of fat-soluble nutrients. Mm-hmm. When the gallbladder is removed, the liver has to take over the job. The job has to be done because you need bile, otherwise you'd be running to the bathroom every time you put fat in your mouth, because it would go all the way through.
Right.
So the liver so it puts stress on the liver. There are things that you can get. Their gallbladder support is what I call it, just gallbladder. I don't think supplements, because they are supplements, but there's different kinds. There's kinds that are a little bit less strong, and that includes like beets and cabbage and things that are really healthy for the liver, that supports the liver because now it's doing the job of the gallbladder. Or there's that with the additional ox bile. And ox bile is just taking additional bile, so it helps break down that fat. Now, only you would take a supplement like that at the time you eat that food. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you had a gallbladder, the gallbladder wouldn't release bile all the time. That's not what it does. It only releases bile when you eat a fatty meal, or meal with fat. Doesn't even have to be a fatty meal, a meal with fat, and it would release the bile to break down the fat. So pretend that liver supplementation and support with a little bit of ox bile is exactly the same as the gallbladder. It activates when you eat fat. So I actually keep a little bit in my purse. And every time I'm out or if I'm here, I always take, before I eat, a little, it has beets, cabbage, and a little bit of oxbell to help me. Although I have my gallbladder, I still take it when I eat a pretty heavy meal, just to help with that additional fat emulsification and absorption.
Well, a lot of great information, Jody, and really appreciate your time joining us here on NorthWest Digital News to share about osteoporosis and some solutions for it. Great information. I hope those of you in our viewing audience that heard what Jody here had to share today, that you really take this stuff to heart. And you know, the probably the best thing I'd say, because a lot of people struggle with this, you know, how do I start doing, you know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, how do I do them all perfectly? And for me and my family, it took time. And what I'd really suggest, if that you're on the wrong diet entirely and you're eating all of the wrong foods, start introducing these better foods into your diet, and make it a goal that you're going to be on a healthy diet, whether it's 60 days or 90 days or whatever from now, but start transitioning these good foods in, and just by default, you'll be displacing some of those not so good foods for you. But start small and keep working at it, and over time, you can come up with a much better diet. Myself, because I believe so much in this stuff, and because I've benefited so much personally, health-wise, from this, I just go all in tomorrow. But I recognize that most people aren't in that situation, and there's a ton of learning. And, you know, you shared 4 things here. There could have been 40 things, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
and one of the questions I ask every one of my clients, so I have these listed questions, one of the top 5 is, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, are you a baby step kind of person, like 1 or 2 or somewhere, or are you an all in 10? Like, and because it's easier to work with people knowing, are they I'm going to take baby steps, which is the vast majority of people, or I'm going to, you know, quit smoking, quit drinking, quit sugar, and start running a marathon all in the same day, which there are those people, but it's not real common.
Well, you know what's funny is we are also talking about, although it hasn't been mentioned, we are also talking about comfort zone. And I have come to learn that one of the strongest and most controlling elements of comfort zone that we as human beings have is the food that we eat. We decide from little kids and through our adolescent years and then our adult years what we like and don't like. And there's all kinds of people out there that are making poor food choices because they decided a long time ago that they don't like these whole foods, these nutrient-dense foods, and they'd prefer to eat the Suzy Q or the refreshment off the shelf at the gas station. They've convinced themselves that's what they'd like. So I'd also challenge people to challenge your own comfort zone and start looking at these other food options. So you had one more thought you wanted to share, Kyle.
Now, this is off topic, but someone's asking about the letters on your hat.
The letters on my hat, CSI. Yes. That's actually a really long story. It comes from 2006, and I was a FBI officer, or not FBI officer on Criminal Minds, but I was a member on, it's CSI New York with Gary Sinise, and so I did a police officer role and a detention officer role, and this is one of my little souvenirs from the show. So, all right, well, yes, that was off topic. We're going to conclude with that.
A great way to end.
A great way to end, yes. Kevin Hunter with Kyle Torgerson, and of course, Jody Summers out of California. Thank you, Jody, so much for your contributions to the show here today. And thanks to everybody who joined us here on this broadcast. As always, till next time,